Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In today's episode, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces. Now, there is information coming out of a variety of news sources, predominantly in the Ukraine and in Western Europe, that would indicate a possible Russian military buildup inside of Belarus. Now, what is the meaning of this buildup? Is it a possible threat to Western Europe? Is it the creation of capacity for further offensive operations south towards Kiev? Well, we don't know at this point. But per the Kiev Independent, this is the information that is coming out from Zelensky out of the Ukraine. Russia is possibly preparing for a major military escalation, potentially targeting NATO countries next year, President Volodymyr Zelensky said on February 14th. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, Zelensky said that Russia plans to deploy 15 divisions, totaling 100,000 to 150,000 troops, primarily in Belarus. While the buildup could focus on Ukraine, he cautioned that Russian forces might shift towards Poland or the Baltics, raising concerns about a broader conflict with NATO. Now, this is where it gets interesting in terms of what Zelensky had said prior. Based on all the information I've gathered from intelligence and other sources, I think he, Russian President Vladimir Putin, is preparing for war against NATO countries next year. But, he added, he can't be 100% certain. Just like in 2022, they could move forward towards Ukraine, or they could go to Poland or the Baltics. And I believe this is his idea. His, meaning Putin. God bless, we will stop this crazy guy, quote unquote, Zelensky at it. Now, what's happening? All right. So normally, the Russian Federation conducts these Zapad operations or these West operations. And yes, they are designed to move military capacity into its chief ally, who they have several treaties with, protection-based treaties, and we commonly see Russian troops being deployed into Belarus. Now, what do we know is possibly being prepared to be moved into Belarus? Well, the Russians are claiming about 13,000 troops. Now, when we say 13,000 troops, this also includes support elements. It includes the Air Force elements of the Russian military. It includes strategic rocket troops. It includes railway and infrastructure type troops. It includes special operations forces along with motorized rifle elements as well. So, in all probability, we will see the Russians move between 1 and 2 motorized rifle brigades into Belarus for said Zapad normal operations that take place. We will see that happen. Now, Zelensky is claiming 100 to 150,000 troops. Highly unlikely. Now, some of the infrastructure preparations would include the Russians preparing to move that size of force if it came to conflict with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Look, the West does this as well. The United States, Germany, France, and especially operating with its partners such as Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, they will move 1 to 2 brigades to test out the infrastructure and the processes of moving those heavy brigades or those air mobile assault brigades. But the actual war game that is going on behind the scenes is much, much bigger. So in all likelihood, we are seeing the same type of operation from the Russians. We are seeing 1 to 2 maneuver brigades being joined by air defense and air force elements of the Russian military. And if you add those 2 brigades and you add the support elements and you add the air force and air defense elements, that's going to come to about 13,000 troops. But the actual war game being played by the general staff in Moscow, in the Western Military District, the Moscow Military District, in all probability looks a lot different. A hypothetical war against NATO. And the Russians have to prepare for this. NATO is an adversary to the Russian Federation. They are supplying weapons, equipment, and in some cases troops to fight against Russian forces in eastern Ukraine. So yes, there is an adversarial relationship. Is there going to be a move by the Russians into Poland? No. The only way the Russians would move against NATO would if the Russians reasonably believed that Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, in conjunction with Poland, was a clear and present danger to Kaliningrad. Now, is the West wargaming for a potential operation against Kaliningrad? The answer is yes. Strategically, the easiest way to inflict a damaging defeat upon the Russian Federation would be attacking the weakest point. NATO essentially envelops Kaliningrad, this area here. To the north and east, you have Lithuania. You have NATO forces operating in Lithuania. To the south and west of Kaliningrad, you have Poland, who is building up military capacity as we speak. The United States continues military operations and training exercises inside of Poland. So you have NATO forces to the south, you have NATO forces to the east, and you have naval assets also operating in the Baltic Sea, which essentially surrounds Kaliningrad. The Russians are preparing for relief operations in the event of war with NATO, and they have to establish a direct land route into Kaliningrad. That is what we're seeing. Perfectly reasonable, perfectly plausible. Are we seeing the preparatory operations by the Russians for an invasion of the Baltics? No, we're not. That sort of capacity is being built. The Russians have their hands full right now with what is happening inside of the Ukraine. They are not interested in building a capacity to invade the Baltics. Now, could they? Possibly. But that in all likelihood would lead to a direct conflict with NATO proper, meaning Poland, and thereby opening up another front on the Polish-Belarusian border. And that is what we're watching right now. We are watching the Russians prepare contingency plans for possible operations against the West. But for the most part right now, the Russians are very much focused on operations against the Ukrainian-controlled North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Ukrainian-controlled North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The NATO-controlled Ukrainian forces. I apologize. But that's what we're watching. Now, at this point, we do not see the movement of men, materiel, more importantly, actual combat divisions being moved by the Russians into Belarus that would pose any threat to Poland or the Baltic states. The Russians are not building up that kind of capacity right now. We're just not seeing it. Could they? Possibly. But right now, within reason, the Russians are committed to the conflict that is taking place in the Ukraine and are looking at essentially wrapping this up. Could they launch operations through Belarus into northern Ukraine? Possibly. That could happen. It was done prior. But a buildup that is directed towards actual NATO member states, specifically Poland, no. The Russians would have to really wrap things up in the Ukraine before they open up a secondary front against the Poles. That's just a fact. And to state that the Russians are preparing for war against NATO, either this summer or next summer, is nonsensical. The Russians are not going to do that. Not yet. Not yet. If the Baltic states continue to antagonize Russia and inject themselves into this conflict inside of the Ukraine, who knows? Again, the Ukraine is not part of NATO. The Baltic states should not be injecting themselves into this conflict. Weapon systems provided by the United States and Western European powers to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are designed to protect Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, not be received by the Baltic states and then transfer those weapon systems into the Ukraine. Or Lithuania threatening to close the corridor into Kaliningrad. If that happens, if Lithuania breaches treaty with the Russian Federation and Belarus in terms of allowing Russian access into Kaliningrad, that will change everything. And then, yes, you could see a military operation by the Russian Federation to open a corridor. But that is unlikely. Very unlikely at this point. Again, all sides are very much focused on what is happening in the Ukraine. Again, possibly a Russian move through Belarus into Ukraine towards Kiev. Maybe. That is a possibility. But directed at Lithuania or Poland, no, we're just not seeing that happen right now. We're seeing preparatory defensive operations and contingency planning by the Russians in case direct conflict does happen between Russia and NATO, which is normal. NATO does the exact same thing. So that's where we're at. So as always, thanks for joining us. More to come very soon. Good day.